Hey everybody, good morning. It is Sunday morning, which means this is Grief Inspired Live. And I come to you here on Facebook every Sunday morning. You can find little Kelly here. I go to Kelly when I need a little pick me up, when I need to remember who I am. So this is Grief Inspired Live, and I come to you here every Sunday morning on Facebook. And then what I do is I take these videos and I upload them to my Grief Inspired YouTube channel. So if you want to see any of the videos that I've done, please go to my YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and as you all know, hit the bell so that you'll get notified when I upload new videos. And there are new videos at least once a week, sometimes twice, really just based on my conversations with people and how things come up and what I feel like is needed in the world. So today I want to talk about when we feel like a victim to your grief. And I think I'll start by asking, do you feel like you're a victim to your grief? I personally believe that life teaches us about ourselves, about our lives, and that we can learn from that if we pay attention. And so I believe that the same thing holds true for our grief, that as difficult as it is, that there are things to be learned, things that come out of the struggle, things that come out of the challenge. And I think that the real power comes from figuring out what those things are. And they're going to be unique to all of us. And certainly I did not feel this way early on. I felt very much like a victim after I lost my son. And I remember thinking to myself over and over again, why does this happen? Why does God take babies? Why do babies die? Why do children of any age die? Because it seems so wrong. And then, why did this happen to me? And so when I created Grief Inspired, the entire ideology behind Grief Inspired and why I chose that name is that I believe that grief teaches us about ourselves and about our lives if we choose to pay attention. And I think that that's an important point. It's easy to be a victim to grief, and it's justified to feel victimized by your grief and to feel like maybe you did something wrong and that's why you're suffering. I know I felt that way. I remember thinking to myself, like, what did I do? What kind of person have I been to have this happen to me? And so I was very much feeling like a victim for a long time, a couple of years, honestly. And then as I started grieving, things began to shift and things started to change for me. And so what I want to talk about today is, if you're in a place where you're feeling victimized by grief, or honestly by anything that's going on in your life, I want to give you another perspective, the perspective that I learned through my years of going through everything that I went through all of the learning, all of the teaching, all of the education that I really poured into and I really dived into because I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand why this happened, why it happens at all, why it happens for me. And it was really about putting meaning around it and saying, like, what does this all mean? And why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? And what can I make this mean, right? Is it possible to come to terms with this, to come to terms with whatever has happened to you, and not necessarily forget about it or just, move on from it, but to use it to inform you, to educate you, and to be additive to your life rather than something that just takes from you, something that steals your joy. Because early on in the grief process, and no matter where you are in the grief, we can feel like our joy has been taken away. And it doesn't seem right. And it doesn't seem fair. And in many ways, it's not fair. But I think the takeaway is, what do we do with that? And how do we resolve that? So let me start by saying, I chose the name Grief Inspired because I love the term inspired, and that comes from the Latin inspire, which actually sounds super cool. But it means to breathe or to blow into. And another definition of inspire is to influence, to move, or to guide. So I felt very early on that my grief inspired me, that it caused me to move, it caused me to act, it gave me a guide and a direction that I didn't know at the time that I needed to move. And so the premise of Grief Inspired is that you can be influenced by your grief, you can move because of your grief, or act on what you're learning as a result of your grief, and you can be guided to find something new, to maybe believe something new, to become more. And the term inspirator, I love this word. An inspirator is someone who inspires you. And so I hope to do that, right? That's my mission with Grief Inspired, is to inspire to look a little deeper, to not take your grief as being a victim, to not take your grief as something that just happens to you, that's done to you, that somehow is wronged to you, and to flip the script on it a little bit and say, well, how can I really look at this, and what does that mean? So again, I said inspire means breathe, or to breathe or blow into. And I love that because there's so much about grief that you need to breathe into, right? Every day is an exercise in just taking the next breath and getting through the next moment. And there are times when those moments are so hard and you don't think that you can get through it. But what I'm often reminded is that the one thing that never leaves us, the one thing that we always have from the day we are born until the day and the moment that we die, is our breath. And we can control our breath. We can speed up our breath when we want to get more excited and things seem like, oh, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go. We can create a faster breath. And when things are really hard and grief is all over us and it's weighing us down, you can choose to take a moment and breathe a little bit more slowly. So you have the power to slow it down. And so in the uncontrollable and uncertainty of grief, one thing that you should know for sure, and here's a tip, you can control your breathing. And you can control how your body feels physically, mentally, emotionally, by the way you control your breath. So I can't say enough about that. But again, when I think about Grief Inspired and inspire, meaning to breathe or to blow into you, right? What I try to do is give you hope that you can survive it and inspire you to believe that you can get through this, particularly in the hardest of times. And to give you the opportunity to look at your grief and to look at the things that are going on in your life and what you're learning and what were the hard parts and what were the things that really challenged you and what were the things that made you most angry. What are the things that lull you into a depression that you just can't get out of? And looking at those things, that's where the meaning comes into. And so I want to take a moment here, and I want to ask you a few questions, because this is all, the thing about it is, I can guide you, I can hopefully move you, I can inspire you, but this is all about you and what this meaning is for you, and you finding a way to wrap your head around what's going on and to find that meaning. And everybody talks about coming to acceptance with your grief. Yeah, you need to come to terms and you need to say, okay, this has happened, and nothing that I can do, nothing that I can say, there's no way to change this. That's acceptance. But meaning goes beyond that, and finding meaning in grief is really, for me, it was the Holy Grail. So let's just start with me asking you a few questions. So take a moment and close your eyes if you can. And think about your grief. Think about your grief over the past 6 months. Think about your grief over the past year, however long it's been. If you're new to grief, think about your grief over the last couple of weeks or days even. And here's some questions. What does your grief inspire in you? What do you feel in your heart? What wants to come out? What wants to come up? What do you want to be moved to do? What does your grief make you want to do? Maybe in the moment, right now, or maybe in the future. Where do you want to go? What are the things that come up for you in your mind? And then what does your grief make you want to learn? What are the things that confuse you about your grief? What are the things that you're not sure of? The things that puzzle you, the things that keep you up at night, that say, for me, it was things like, why does this happen? I grappled with my faith and my religion that I had grown up with, that I was told this is what you believe and this is the way it is. But for me, little side story, I went to the priests and the elders in my church and the people who I thought to be the most religious. And I said, how does this happen? Please help me understand. And I didn't get good answers. And I was really troubled by that. And I was upset by that for a really long time. Made me feel like a victim. And then I said, no one's going to tell me. And I found this amazing quote, and I can't remember it off of the top of my head, but the answers that you are seeking to your life are within you. No one can make your heart feel at home like you can. And so I realized for myself that I needed to look within. But it made me want to learn, right? So the question was, what does your grief make you want to learn? Well, I wanted to learn. So I started studying religion more. I grew up Catholic, and so I wanted to understand, well, what does Catholicism say about death? What does it say about loss? What does it say about whether or not there's an afterlife? So I studied, and I started reading, and I started talking to people. And so that was, my grief made me move. My grief made me act. As a result of your grief, who do you want to become? Is there something inside of you that's telling you you need a change? That things shouldn't stay the way they are? Are you feeling like you're being sort of moved into a different direction, or maybe being led somewhere else? Last week we talked about me wanting to be creative, right? And doing creative things, right? I was moved to be creative because I needed to figure out a place for my emotions to go, to release them, right? So I was moved to do that. I was moved to photography. I was moved to gardening and to succulents. And what is that for you? What does that look like for you? So I hope those questions were helpful. I want to encourage you to continue to ponder them over the next day, over the next week, because again, key ideology of Grief Inspired is that grief and your grief is about your life and the life that you have still here. It's not about the death of your loved one. And the other thing is that how you choose to live your life is the way you honor them, the way you pay tribute to them, the way you make their life have more meaning, right? Because their life has meaning because it was meaningful to you, because you're the one who's here and you're the one who's hurting. And that's because you love them, and that's because their life had meaning. It's because their life mattered, just like yours does. And so if you're the one who's left here without your loved one, how can you honor them just by living your life? And what does that look like? And so the premise around Grief Inspired when I work with my coaching clients is I have three fundamental, I call them pillars to your grief. And it's a way to, how do I get through this grief? How do I get from feeling victimized to really creating meaning? And it's three pillars. And then the first pillar is looking at your grief and saying, what is my grief? How am I interacting with my grief? What is grief doing to me? And what is this grief thing all about, right? So the first pillar dives into, what happens to grief? What can you expect? What can you prepare for? What are the things that you need to know just to get through it, particularly even in the earliest days? And then the second pillar is, what does my grief mean to me? And because of my grief, what am I learning about myself? Am I living the life that I want to have, or do I need to reevaluate? Because grief, heavy grief will change you as a person fundamentally. And it can send us topsy-turvy because we feel like, wow, I had this life, and now all of a sudden, what I want, the things that used to have meaning, particularly for me, everything that had meaning to me no longer seemed really that important. And everything that I had invested my entire life and my education and my schooling and my money and my time and my blood and sweat and tears, it didn't seem as important. So I had to look within, and I had to do the personal work and say, well, what does this mean for me? And then I started changing things, and my life is dramatically different 10 years after my loss than it was, back then. And for me, the grief-inspired component is because my life is in many ways better because I've grown so much. So that's the first pillar, is your grief. The second pillar is looking at yourself. And then the third pillar is, how do you deal with the rest of the world? Because now fundamentally you have changed, and the way you see the world and the way you view things and the way you view yourself in the world, maybe before your loss and then after your loss, well, that's different too. And so what does that mean for you? And I think that, the reason why most people struggle so much with grief is because, I talk about this vision of being on a path, and you're on a path and you have an expected future and the direction that you're walking, and then grief happens. You lose a spouse, you lose a child, you lose a parent, you lose someone that you love, and everything doesn't seem right anymore. And the path that you're on and the expected future that you had is no longer available. And the reason why it's so scary is because it's like, now you got to find a new path. And that path may be covered in branches and leaves, and you might not have a sickle or an axe to cut through it. So that third pillar is taking yourself and saying, okay, how are you relating now to the rest of the world? What is the new path that you need to be on? What do you want to create on that path? What are you going to do on that path? And for me, it was creating Grief Inspired. For me, it was finding out, who I was as a person and why I wanted to help. And fundamentally, internally, that I want to help. I want to be an inspirator. I want to inspire. I want to give you hope. I want you to know that you deserve to be happy, that we all deserve to be happy. We all deserve to be loved. That's what my path was. And so your journey is figuring out what yours is. And when you get further along in the path, you'll notice that you're on your path, and you'll notice that new things are happening. So for example, because of your loss, because of your grief, you have a knowledge that you didn't have before you experienced your loss. And so maybe that knowledge will help you to reach out to someone who's hurting because they've just lost someone. Just to be able to say, hey, I got you. Or like, I'm really sorry that this happened. This stinks. It must be so awful for you. I'm praying for you. I want to give you strength. I want to help you through the process. and I'm going to check in on you regularly at regular intervals to make sure that you're doing okay, to know that there's somebody in the world who absolutely cares what you're going through. Those are the things I think that grieving and the knowledge of grieving will give you, is the ability to reach out to somebody when they're hurting, because and it gives us, empathy, and defining empathy. Empathy is compassion in action, right? So when you feel something for somebody else because they're hurting, and you see hurt in them, it's reflected in you because that same hurt. When you act on that hurt, and when you act in empathy, that's what empathy is empathy is compassion, compassion in action. And then the other thing is are there things that you're more grateful for now, because you have a knowing that life can be short, and that we all want to think that we can grow and live to be old adults, and we'll all grow old together, because these are the stories that we talk about. But sometimes tragedy happens, and sometimes things happen, and people die, and babies die, and people get cancer, and horrible, horrible, awful things happen. And so when these things happen, you talk to someone who has survived cancer, someone who has lost a child, someone who has lost a spouse and come out the other side, you'll notice that they have this amazing compassion. And then in addition to that, they're grateful. They're grateful for what they have, because they know. They know what it means to lose it. And so when you have those little moments of, a child's laughter, or the smell of a baby's head, or the brewing of coffee in the morning, or hearing the birds, and just sitting and hearing nature, or listening to an ocean, there's a gratitude that comes out of that we might have missed if we hadn't gone through our grief. And I mentioned before that, I struggled with religion, and I don't ever make, what I talk about, anything, I try not to push my beliefs on anybody. But my grief has really brought me to understand my faith a little bit more. And like I said, I'm Catholic, and we've just gone through in the Catholic faith, and we're finishing up the Easter season. And the Easter season is, about the resurrection of Jesus, and the belief that we will all be resurrected one day. And this is the core of the Catholic Church, right? It's the core of what I was raised on. It's the core of what I was taught to believe. And what I like about it is that the resurrection of all of us, of all of our loved ones, if you choose to believe that, and I don't think that we talk about it enough when it comes to grief and funerals and death, even in the Catholic Church, honestly. But it's about the promise and the hope, and it's about of seeing our loved ones again, and knowing that we're here on this planet for a limited time, but we're all meant to be together. And when there's the phrase in Revelations that says no more sorrows and no more tears, that's the world that we're supposed to live in, is the one without sorrow, the one without pain, the one without tears. That's how it's supposed to be, but that's not what we got. And so for me, it's about spending time here on this planet and trying to alleviate some sorrow, whether it's just from my friends, from my family, or for all of you who I touch through YouTube, who are all over the world that I may never meet, right? But I feel like this is what I love about these YouTube videos, and what YouTube can do is it can really bring us together, and it can help us to connect, and we can spend time together, and we can talk about our pain and our sorrow and find ways to alleviate it. So it's what's important. So my question for you is, do you still feel like a victim to your grief? Do you believe that you can find meaning? And is there more for you? Does it have to end in sorrow for you? Do you have to live a life full of pain, full of sorrow, as a victim? I say no, and that's what Grief Inspired does. And if I can help you walk through your grief, whatever that looks like for you, then that's what I want to do. Because that's the gift of grief that I was given. It's the meaning that I found that yes, my son is gone. The miscarried baby is gone. But they have so much meaning, and they've grown my heart so many sizes, and I think that that's a really beautiful thing. And I do consider it to be a gift. And I know that that can be controversial, and some people disagree with me, and that's okay. Because this is my journey, and your journey is your journey. And I just hope that as I do this, I can help you along yours. So be gentle to yourself. Again, remember to breathe. Remember that you own your breath. From the moment you are born to the moment you die, you are in control of your breath. You can breathe in and you can breathe out, and you can slow it down when you need to, and you can speed it up when you need to too. So take care today, and we'll all talk to you soon. Please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Bye.